me put it this way. I'd like to think that God is real.
I don't believe in God because the idea that an omniscient, loving being would judge me, who is mortal and ignorant, based on a few years' experience, I find to be rather a cruel thought.
All the power that God has, he, she, it has given to me. So we're definitely one.
I hope there's something else out there. It'd be fun to experience either that or we're all just evolved apes.
I
was raised atheist. I don't believe in a higher power, but I also don't claim to know everything about the world.
I don't know. I don't know if there is one. I just pretend, I guess, and hope that there's something else out there.
Welcome. It is nice to be back. I missed you guys all last week. I wasn't able to be here, but I'm glad to be here as we are now in episode 2 of this series, Explore God. And I wanted to start off talking about something that I talk about all the time. I've mentioned several times that I grew up going to church. Now, there's probably a lot of you here who grew up going to church. Maybe there's some of you here who growing up, church wasn't part of your family's activities, but I grew up going to church. And I knew growing up that there was a God, but I really didn't understand much about who he was. I figured, yeah, he was out there somewhere, and what I did understand, what I was taught, was that there were some people that God liked, and there were some people that he didn't. And the people who God liked, we called them blessed. And the people who God didn't like, we called them cursed. And the people who were blessed were the ones that lived a good life and they would end up in heaven. And the people who were cursed were the ones that lived a fun life. I mean, no, that's not fun. Not a good life. And they ended up going somewhere else. And so I just always figured that as long as I, kept putting in my time every week, if I just made sure that every weekend I was there at church, that I would just squeak by. Because see, I didn't really want to be on the dean's list of heaven. That wasn't really anything I thought I needed to do. If I could squeak in with a C-, I figured I was safe, and that's all I wanted to do. And then when I was in college, I took a freshman political science class, and I was studying about this guy. His name was Karl Marx. They called him the father of communism. And one of his famous quotes was this: "Religion is the opiate of the masses." And what he meant was that religion was this thing that would keep people where they are without complaining. That religion, and by extension God, was something that the ruling elite created so that they could placate and control the masses of the people. And I have to tell you, this made a lot of sense to me. This was logical to me. Because think about it, if you're a small group of people and you want to control a larger group of people, what better way to do that than to create this mythical idea of a God who tells you that if you endure suffering, your reward will be in heaven. And so, of course, you'll endure suffering. Well, what's better than a small group of people teaching a larger group of people to turn the other cheek, to forgive those that hurt you? And so they created this mythical being in the sky that you can't see and you can't hear and you can't touch, but he teaches you to love your enemies and to turn the other cheek, and people will never complain. And this made a lot of sense to me. And I thought to myself, man, what if this guy was right? What if he was right? What if everything that he was saying, and it made so much sense, but what if everything he said was true? Is it possible that for the last 2,000 years, tens of millions of people have fell for this trick? Have fallen for a myth? Is it possible? I have to tell you, it bothered me a lot. It bothered me so much. I thought about it. And I realized that what my question was, what I didn't know, what I wanted really to know for sure, for certain, was the question that we're addressing today. And it's simply this: is there a God? Is there a God? Now, the question of whether or not there is a God or God is real is one of the most profound questions that philosophers and theologians have ever taken on. There was a man named Derek Parfit. He's British. You can tell by his hair. But he's a British philosopher and a moral theorist, and this is what he said. He said, no question is more sublime than why there is a universe, why there is anything rather than nothing. Why is there something now rather than nothing? Which is what a lot of people believe how everything started. You know, the idea of God is pretty hard to avoid in our culture today. Right? Even if you don't come to the conclusion, even if you don't believe that there is a God, I will bet you that you still think about the idea of God once in a while. Because it's all around us. Right? Everybody who was holding some cash in your pocket, it says, in God we trust. If you grew up going to school here in the United States, every morning you started off the day by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, which says in big words, one nation under God. This is a plaque that you can get at Hobby Lobby, by the way, if you want to take that home. Adults aren't the only ones that wrestle with the idea of, is there a God? Even kids do. There was a book that was published a few years ago with actual letters from kids who wrote letters to God. And I love them, so we're going to go through them. The first one is from Jacob. This is not my Jacob. This is a different Jacob. And Jacob writes, Dear God, are you a ninja? Is that why I can't see you? Which makes a lot of sense. Right? Here's one from Marnie. Marnie says, Dear God, on Halloween I'm going to wear a devil's costume. Is that all right with you? Or how about this one? Dear God, did you mean for giraffes to look like that, or was it an accident? How about this? Dear God, I went to this wedding and they kissed right in church. Is that okay? This one I love. This is from Philip, and he says, Dear God, can you please make it so I can run faster? I sure hope so. And then anybody who's grown up with brothers will completely understand Larry. Dear God, maybe Cain and Abel would not kill each other so much if they had their own rooms. It works with my brother. And we can laugh about that because we know that those questions will probably go unanswered. But as adults, when we have questions about God, and they go unanswered, it can be difficult. It can make God seem less real. So we're in episode 2 of this series that's called Explore God. And actually it's a privilege for me, and it's just so great that we talked about this, that there's about 200 churches all over the Bay Area that this weekend are participating in this Explore God series. 200 churches all over the Bay Area, and they're all taking on these 7 questions together. And so there's churches over this weekend that are going to be talking about this very question, is there a God? And it is just the second of the journey that we're going through over the next few weeks, over the next, 5 weeks now, where we're going to talk about 7 big questions that people have about their faith. Now listen, if you are here and you are not a Christian and you came because you wanted to find out what is this Explore God thing about, I want you to know that my goal isn't to convince you of something, and I don't believe that at the end of this, all of your doubts are going to be removed. My goal is that we have this time together to explore this question. And today's question is one of, I think, the questions that seems the most simple, but is actually quite complicated. Is there a God? You know, studies, they've talked to people, and what they figured out through their surveys and stuff is that here in the United States, about 81% of the people believe that there is a God or a higher power out there. And of that 81%, more than half of them believe in the God that is described in the Scriptures. And some people will say that when they deny the existence of God, what they say is that people who believe in God are the people who are uneducated. Like if you really had a brain and you really thought about it, you would realize that there is no God. And yet some of history's most intellectual, most intelligent people were also some of the most convinced people that God exists. Albert Einstein was one of the most recognized and revered scientists of our time. And this is what he said. He said, everyone who is seriously committed to the cultivation of science becomes convinced that in all the laws of the universe is manifest a spirit vastly superior to man, and to which we with our powers must feel humble. I have a list of 10 other quotes that I didn't bring up from people who were way, way smarter than me. Very, very intelligent people who came to the conclusion on their own that God did exist. But the reality is that we can argue about the existence of God on so many levels. We can argue about His existence on a physical level, on a metaphysical level. We can argue about Him historically or philosophically or even teleologically. But the thing is, we're not robots. Right? You and I don't operate simply on logic. If it did, The Office wouldn't be such a great TV show. The reason it works is because we are emotional beings. We are not just logical beings. We're relational, and we rely on our intuition. We're not just if you do this, then this happens kind of a being. We are actually surprisingly complex. And so the answer to the question, is there a God, can't just be intellectual. It also has to be experiential. People experience God. And for many people, their experience with God and God's people, I'll tell you right now, it hasn't helped. People have experienced God's people and walked away from them and then walked away from God. Over the last several decades, but especially in the last 15 years, there's been among Christians especially people who have grown up in the church, a staggering, what we refer to today as a crisis of belief. That people are deconstructing their beliefs. So maybe you grew up in church, you stayed in church, and then one day you were burned by a friend in church, or you were burned by a staff member in church, and you thought, well, if God's people are like that, I don't want to be around them, until you walked away. Or maybe for you, every version of God's people that you encountered seemed to display this narrow-minded, petty, arrogant attitude. And you said to yourself, if that is what God is like, I don't want to have anything to do with Him. One of the things that we're seeing is that people who are in their 20s and 30s, and there's several of you here today, they are deconstructing their faith. That the faith that they grew up with, the childhood faith that they were given as they were growing up, when they crossed over into adulthood, they found that it wasn't working. That their childhood faith worked for them as children, but no one transitioned them into an adult faith that operates in an adult world. And their relationship with Jesus just crumbled, and today they have no faith at all. I have to tell you, if you've experienced something like that, if that's your story, I don't blame you. I'll bet that if I went through what you went through and then you decided to walk away from the church, if I went through that, I will bet you that I probably would have done and responded the same way that you responded. But what I'll also bet is that your experiences with God are much broader than just those experiences with the people who hurt you or disappointed you or showed you something that you didn't think was what God was all about. In fact, I will bet that all of us at some point in our life experienced these moments of awe and wonder that told us, that pointed us to something that was bigger, that was beyond ourselves. Today, in the time that we have remaining, what I want to talk about are signposts. I call them signposts, these moments that don't necessarily make an airtight case for God, but I believe that they kind of point us towards God. And while there's lots of convincing arguments for God, and there's lots of convincing arguments against God, either way you fall, it involves a degree of faith. Whether you believe that God exists or not, there's faith that is required for you to come to that conclusion. And what I'm going to propose to you today is that these signposts point us in the direction of a God that is bigger than we are. That there's something about them that resonates deep inside us and that makes us realize that there is something out there that is greater than who we are, greater than anything that we could do on our own. My wife, her hometown is this city up on the beach way north of Manila called Miller Ave. And because we got married, I had to go and visit that place. And it's beautiful, but it's like a 6-hour drive where the whole thing is just like, you're like this the whole way, right? Horrible, 6 hours. Now, if you talk to her now, she'll tell you, oh no, there's roads now. But when I went, it was 6 hours. Well, we were doing it. So we get to the town. And the town it's a quaint little town at the time. This was probably almost 30 years ago, right? When we first went there? All right, so it was a little village, like out right on the beach. And it was beautiful. But there was no cell phone reception. The town had one phone in City Hall. That was it. If you wanted to call, you had to go to City Hall, and there was one phone. This was that town. They had no stoplights. They had no street lights. But I have to tell you, I've lived here in the Bay Area most of my life. And when I look up at the sky at night, well, I usually see fog. And if I don't see fog, I see, United 1425 on its way to Dallas, right? I hardly ever see stars. But when I was in Blair and nighttime came, and first of all, there were no houses around their house, and there was no street lights, and there was no stoplights, there was just no light at all. This is what it looked like. It was absolutely gorgeous. Full of stars. And I remember standing outside of her house, right next to the pit where they had just barbecued an entire cow, and looking up at the sky and thinking to myself, wow, that is amazing. It was absolutely beautiful, and you can't help but stand there and think to yourself, there must be something greater than this. Now listen, you don't have to go to Blair, although if you talk to her, she will tell you all the great reasons to go, but you don't have to go to Blair to experience that, right? The first signpost is beauty, and I believe that the beauty of the world around us shows us and points us to something that is greater than what is in ourselves. And like I said, if you lived here in the Bay Area, how many of you have ever been to Miller Woods? And seen how beautiful that is? Or driven 4 hours north and gone to the Avenue of the Giants and to the tree that you can drive right through? How many of us have stood in awe at Half Dome in Yosemite at sunset? It's all around us. There's an Oxford professor and theologian, his name is N.T. Wright, and in his book, Simply Christian, he writes this. He says, we must acknowledge that beauty, whether in the natural order or within human creation, is sometimes so powerful that it evokes our very deepest feelings of awe, wonder, gratitude, and reverence. We've all experienced these moments, haven't we? And if you're willing to pause long enough from this fast-paced life that we're forced to live here where we live, you can look around and you can't help but being struck by the awe and wonder of the world around us. You know, it's interesting. Have any of you ever been to the Grand Canyon? Any of the lookouts at the Grand Canyon? Okay, a lot of you have. Have you ever noticed that when you go to one of the lookouts at the Grand Canyon, that no one talks? That it's quiet? That when you stand in front of something that is that majestic and that wonderful, that there is a natural reverence inside us that just makes us stop and pause, remain silent and ponder. That the beauty must require an artist to create it. In fact, many people who have gone around the world and thought about this idea have concluded that the beauty of our world points us to a divine artist that created that beauty, that constructed a good and ordered and beautiful world. Amen. In the scriptures, one of the poets actually wrote about it. He said, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known." Years later, a man named Paul who was a man who wrote most of what we call the New Testament in the Bible today, he was writing a letter to the church in Rome, and he said this. He said, "They," meaning the people who don't know God, "they know the truth about God." You see what he's saying? People who don't believe in God know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. Well, what do you mean, Paul? What do you mean? Listen to what he says next. He says, "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. And through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God." The beauty of the world around us reminds us that we are part of something bigger than just us. We're part of something bigger than just you and me. And it's something that we don't just see or hear. It's actually something that we feel deep down inside us. And Christians believe that at the heart of this beautiful universe is a beautiful creator who created all of this beauty just for us. A second signpost that points us to something that is beyond us is justice. The longing that you and I have for justice. Years ago, when Gracepoint first started, we had this brilliant idea of, after the service, going out, or later that evening, going out and having a kickball game. Remember the kickball game? Yeah, that was a mistake. And someone suggested we do it again, and I'm like, no. That is a game of the young. But I remember when I was one of the young, and I would go to a playground, and we would play that in the playground, and instead of it being on dirt, it was on asphalt. And here's the thing. You can go to any playground anywhere in the country, and when you go there and you watch the kids play, eventually you're going to hear someone yell, "That's not fair!" Right? It's natural in us. Like, we don't need to teach kids what's fair and what's not. There's something in them that just knows what's fair and what's not. There's something inside us. It's what makes us human, this sense of fairness and justice. And I believe, especially in the time that we are living in now, and especially with the way that media comes to us from all over the world. You know, it used to be that stuff that happened on the other side of the world would take weeks to get to us. Today, it takes seconds. We know about stuff that's happening all over the world. And right now, don't you feel it? Don't you listen to the news or watch social media and feel something inside you that just says the world isn't the way that it's supposed to be? That the world today isn't how things should be? Our recent history has shown us that we all have experienced at some time this longing for justice. And when we see the media that comes and bombards us all the time, we see protesters filling the streets, the cries of justice are there, and we can feel that longing. Do you know where you've probably really experienced feeling that longing for justice? If you've ever been to a place of extreme poverty. In the Philippines, and listen, I'm using the Philippines because that's the country outside of here that I've been to the most, but in the Philippines there's a place there called Smoky Mountain. And Smoky Mountain is it's a big dump site. And there is a whole neighborhood of people who live on that mountain. And from children to adults, all they do all day, you know how when you're at home and you have all that disgusting garbage and you can finally get it into a plastic bag and you tie it up in a knot and you dump it in the garbage and hope that you never see it again? Yes. They spend their days opening those bags to see if there's anything in there for them. And we experience that, and we see that, and there's just something inside us that says, this isn't how life should be. And again, you don't have to go far. A few years ago, on a trip for school, we went to Skid Row in LA. And it was the same thing. The same experience that you looked at what was happening there and you just knew that there has to be something more than that. Or maybe you've turned on the TV lately and you've seen the most recent stabbing or shooting, the bullet that came out of nowhere and that took the life of an innocent person or an innocent child. And we say to ourselves, this is not how the world's supposed to be. There's just something in our soul that cries out. And we think to ourselves, how many times have you looked at something and said, someone needs to do something? Because we feel so powerless on our own to do anything. A man named C.S. Lewis, who was one of the great Christian thinkers of the 20th century. Any of you who have ever watched any of the Chronicles of Narnia movies or read the books, he was the author. This is what he said. He said, human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way, and cannot really get rid of it. He says, what he's saying is that there's something innate in us. That when we see an injustice, when we see something wrong, that there is just something inside us that says, this is not how it's supposed to be. It should be different. The Apostle Paul, he wrote about this and he said, even Gentiles, or even the people who aren't followers of Jesus, the equivalent today would be even the non-Christians. He said even them who do not have God's written law show that they know His law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts for their own conscience and thoughts, either accuse them or tell them they are doing right. See, what C.S. Lewis said and what Paul also said in those statements, they were saying that there are moral standards that cross civilizations. That it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that no matter where you go in the world, betraying a friend, lying to a family member, inflicting pain or hurt on an innocent person, all goes against moral virtue, no matter where you are, no matter what culture you live in. It's universal. Whether you're a Christian or not, it's universal. We all feel that. And C.S. Lewis and Paul are saying that this moral order points to a source of morality. And it's not just a random thing that our synapses put together, but there was a being that put this moral order inside us. A God that is concerned with justice and wants His people to be concerned with fairness. Now, I know some of you are thinking, listen, Christians have been responsible for some of the most horrible things that we've seen in history. And listen, you'd be right. It's true. But we all have the capacity for evil, just as we all have the capacity for good. And the followers of Jesus, no matter how many times we may have gotten it wrong, one of the things you'll see in history is that followers of Jesus have and continue to be a source of fairness and justice in the world. So we have beauty, we have justice. The third signpost, the last signpost that points us to something that is beyond ourselves, is a desire for relationships. There's something in us that needs to have a relationship. We all long to have healthy, meaningful relationships. And isn't it funny that even when relationships are difficult, we still want to have them? That even when we're frustrated with everyone in the world and we just wish that everyone would go away and we just want to be by ourselves, that we still wish someone was there to listen to us complain? We don't want anyone around, but we still want someone around to listen to us and to feel sympathy for us and to empathize with us and to have pity on us. We were made for relationships. And I believe that our experiences in our relationships point us to God. You may have felt this if you've ever witnessed the birth of a child. Or if you've ever seen a couple on their wedding day. Or maybe you're sitting around a table with good friends and you're having great conversation. And suddenly you realize that the conversation has moved away from simply where are we going to go to eat later, to actually having deep, meaningful conversations. That the tone changes because you're getting past the surface level and really connecting with people where we're talking about things that are actually inside us, that we share things that are deeper than just the top level surface, where we talk about our faith for today and our fears for tomorrow. See, we can't possibly be simply a collection of chemicals and neurons. We are an amazing creature, human beings. And what Christians believe is that we are wonderfully made, capable of giving and receiving love. And we believe that relationships point us towards a God who is the definition of love. Even the earliest followers of Jesus believed that what Jesus came to reveal to us about the Father was that God is love. That God is love. And whether you believe in God or not, we've all experienced those moments where someone or something resonates deep inside us. Beauty, a longing for justice, relationships. When we witness these things, or better yet, when we feel them in our gut, we know there's something powerful happening when we have those moments. It's a little like this. I know that this is the treble clef at the top and the bass clef at the bottom. That's because I took piano 8 times. And so I know it really, really well. The treble clef is the notes where the higher frequency notes. And the bass clef are the lower frequency, the deeper tones. Years ago, this is going to date me, I was at a Def Leppard concert at the Shoreline. Nice. Yeah, it was good. But for some reason, I found myself 3 seats away from one of those big, huge speakers. This was before they put them up on posts. It was just like there was a stand, and then the big speaker was right there. And when they got to pour some sugar on me, I could feel it in here. Like I thought I was actually going to pass out or die, because when that bass would go, my chest would go. Like I could feel it. Have you ever felt that? Where your whole body is going zzz, zzz. Right? Treble notes are the ones you hear, but the bass notes are the ones you feel. You feel them deep inside you. And we live in a culture that is full of treble notes. They are coming at you a mile a minute. Social media, fake news, advertising, entertainment, all these treble notes are just coming at you, and they fight for our attention. And all that noise, in all of that noise, I believe that for a lot of us, deep down inside, we're longing for a bass note. Because all we hear is the treble. We long for something that would resonate deep inside us. And what I can't convince you of, but what I can tell you from my own experience, is that the presence of God resonates deep inside you, like a bass. See, God isn't something that we just talk about or learn about. Everywhere in Scripture where we see God interact with people, it's an experience. That God isn't a theory, but He is someone that we experience deep down inside. He lets us feel those treble notes. And that longing we have, whether we recognize it or not, is in all of us. And so while we've been looking at evidence that points us towards an answer to the question, is there a God? I believe that the question we really should be asking is, why believe there is a God? Why should we believe that there is a God? So let me say just one more time, the point of this series is not to convince you, but rather to invite you to explore as we explore these important questions about life and faith together. But today I want to push you a little bit. Because I believe that this is the most important journey that you will ever go on. Some of you grew up in church, you grew up going to church, you've been to church every weekend your entire life, and you know all of the songs, and you've read all of the verses, you've probably memorized more scripture than I have, but deep down inside you still have that question, that longing, is God really there? So I want to push you a little bit today, and push me a little bit today. This is Blaise Pascal. I'm not sure how close that is to him, but that's it. And you may not know who he is, but if you've ever put any money on the Niners to win with the points, well, you owe that to game theory that was developed by Pascal. He was a mathematician, and he was the one who pioneered game theory. Among mathematicians and scientists, he's known as one of the greatest minds ever in Western civilization. But he also had a passion for helping people find their way back to God. So years ago, he introduced what we call today Pascal's wager. Game theory, betting man, Pascal's wager. And what he did was he began to challenge his fellow intellectuals to a wager on God. He dared them to step into a belief in God and see if it didn't change their lives. He said, try for a minute and see if it doesn't. In fact, this is what he says. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to paraphrase it. This is his words. He says, make a bet that there is a God who loves you. This is what he would tell his intellectual friends. Make a bet that there is a God who loves you. If you are right, you have everything to gain. And if you are wrong, you have nothing to lose. Make a bet that God is real. And so today I want to invite you to do something. I want to invite you to do something with me. We're going to do it together. To do it individually for us, and also to do it for us as a community. I want to invite you over this next week to simply pray this little prayer. Even if you don't believe that there is a God out there, or that the God that you think is out there isn't the God of the Bible, I'm going to ask, this is our wager for this week, to just speak this little prayer. God, if you are real, reveal yourself to me. What's it going to hurt for a week? That you would just say, God, if you are real, reveal yourself to me. And see what happens. If there is no God, then nothing will happen and everything will stay the same and your life will have lost a few minutes over 1 week. But what if it is? And then something that we can do together in community, because here's the thing. You and I, we were not meant to live this life individually. We were meant to live in community together. And so I want to invite you to stay on this journey. We've got 5 more weeks to go. And next week is actually going to be in the park where we get to enjoy nature. Well, we get to enjoy the traffic going up now Westboro, but we also get to enjoy nature and food and continue on this journey. But one of the things that we always say here at Gracepoint is that you don't have to believe to belong. You don't have to believe in everything in the scriptures to be a part of our church. So I want to invite you to keep coming back over these next 5 weeks. Keep coming back. But during this week, let's pray individually. God, if you are real, reveal yourself to me. But let's also pray collectively. That God, if you are real, make yourself real to us, to all of us, together as a community. My prayer for you is that you would personally experience the baseness of God's presence this week.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message. Gracepoint Church is located in South San Francisco, California. For additional content or to find out more information about Gracepoint Church, visit us online at wearegracepoint.com.